Scorching temperatures often have a greater impact on minority communities. Unfortunately, there are some of the same areas that are still feeling the brunt of the coronavirus. In this week's It's Not Too Late, our Ginger Zee explains how some cities are already taking matters into their own hands to confront the heat head on.
Hi, I'm Ginger Zee, and it's not too late. Heat kills. I know, it's not breaking news. Also not breaking news, 2020 is the second hottest year to date. But this year, the heat is different because it's coming along with a global pandemic. I mean, in Santa Clara, California, older folks are saying they're just too afraid to go to the cooling centers. In Springfield, Illinois, cooling centers weren't even open because of the virus. Philadelphia declared their first heat health emergency of 2020 while in their second official heat wave. And this is always the hottest time of year. Thanks, jet stream and sun angle. But even in a pandemic, that part's not a surprise. What may surprise you is how disproportionate heat can be when it comes to race. And that's the topic I want to target. So let's start big picture. Heat is the #1 weather killer worldwide. And even in recent history, we've seen some pretty unbelievable events, like the 1980 heat wave that killed at least 1,200 people in the U.S.
The heat wave continues in Texas.
Texas is one of the 6 heat-stricken states that is to receive emergency funds from Washington. Agencies in Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Kansas are all going to distribute the money to those unfortunate people whose existence is being threatened by the heat.
Then there was the Chicago heat wave of 1995. At least 700 people died.
City phone banks are now in full operation with a special emphasis on senior citizens and their needs.
Do you have a fan or air conditioning?
And the European heat wave, 2003, 70,000 victims. 70,000. We're not talking about some 1800s, there's no technology history. That was less than 20 years ago, and tens of thousands of people died from heat. In the last 30 years, heat's by far still the #1 killer in the United States. But let's zero in on heat in the last 2 decades in our country. The CDC did a study, 2004 to 2018, and in it, they found an average of 700 people dying from heat-related illness each year. 90% of the deaths happened between May and September, which makes sense. Mostly in Arizona, California, and Texas. That also makes sense. Here's where it gets interesting. 70% of the deaths were men, mostly 65 years or older. And while more than half of the deaths were white people, Indigenous and Black people had the highest rates of death from heat. Now we know that poverty matches these charts. The highest rates of poverty, Black and Indigenous people. I want you to see some of these maps that were released by NASA and the U.S. Census Bureau in 2019 because it really puts it all together. We can directly relate heat to poverty. So let's start with Minneapolis. On the left, you're going to see the darker red areas. Those show us which neighborhoods are hottest. And then on the right, which neighborhoods are poorest. Dark green corresponds with money, and the light red means it's cooler. So you can clearly see there is a connection between poverty and heat, even in one city. And it's not just in Minneapolis. Baltimore, Maryland, Oakland, California, Lexington, Kentucky, Toledo, Ohio. I could go on because dozens of our nation's most populated cities are hotter where they are poorer. And Richmond, Virginia is no different. And they know it. Their sustainability office can even show how red line neighborhoods are 5 degrees warmer on average than non-red line neighborhoods. And just as a reminder, because redlining's kind of been in the news, but redlining started back in the 1930s. It was when the government designated certain neighborhoods, often predominantly Black or brown communities, with red lines. And that meant that they were too risky for investment, which then led to banks and insurance companies denying those folks home loans and insurance. Dr. Jeremy Hoffman, chief scientist for the Virginia Museum of Science, he says that the link of heat and race is a direct descendant of redlining.
We were able to deduce that 94% of the cities that had these redlining maps produced in the 1930s and 40s now exhibit this exact same pattern, whereby formerly redlined neighborhoods are warmer than their non-redlined neighbors.
And not just warmer, but in some cases 1 or 2 degrees, and in some cases 12 or 13 degrees, right?
Yeah, but in the actual city itself, the temperatures can vary as much as 16 degrees from the coolest and warmest place during a heat wave.
The reason? Less green space, more asphalt. Pavement, especially when it's dark, absorbs heat and then it holds it. It's called the albedo effect. We studied it in meteorology. Trees, wild grasses, well, they absorb and keep less heat.
Not only are these communities experiencing higher levels of heat and potentially stronger, flooding risk, but then also being exposed to higher levels of particulate matter and traffic-related pollution, which then exacerbates, these respiratory and other comorbidity kinds of illnesses.
Illnesses like COVID-19. While there was a time that people really had hoped that the heat of summer would kill the coronavirus, we know now that it's not true. Not only is it not true, but they seem to do eerily well together. Right now, it's hottest from California to Florida, and those are the same places that are seeing COVID outbreaks and record number of new infections. And we know this too. Black folks have 3 times more mortality than white folks with the coronavirus. Some are concerned that the people that are having to choose between their energy bill and being safe from COVID-19 are mostly Black and brown communities.
They're at higher exposure based on the type of jobs that a lot of people in this population have. The essential workers, public transit, food services, I mean, you name it.
Most people getting the coronavirus are the people that have to work. They're the people that have to take public transportation. The same people without access to outdoor space or a cool place to sleep.
What we found was very striking in the similarities of where people in our community live, and very similar maps in terms of pulling up a map of vulnerability to our urban heat island and vulnerability to COVID-19. And the maps, unfortunately, look very similar. And that's because a lot of the factors, the risk factors, are similar.
Let's not forget, heat is cumulative. So our bodies, we can handle 1 or 2 days at 100 with a heat index of 110, but when it doesn't cool down at night or it goes on for a long period of time, the function of our body is just not as good. In many cases, being in a city means that you are even hotter at night. See, at night, a city of more than 1 million people can be as much as 22 degrees warmer than its surroundings. Even the buildings themselves can hold on to heat. And increasing overnight lows are a trademark of climate change. And the World Health Organization is saying that the number of people that have been exposed to heat waves in the last 2 decades not only increased by at least 125 million, they say it's going to get worse as we keep warming.
A lot of global warming conversation tells you as temperatures rise, we're going to see more heat waves and hence more heat deaths. That's absolutely true. But we're also going to be much richer, and we're actually going to buy a lot more air conditioning.
Bjorn Lomborg doesn't buy the increasing heat death story. He also says that cold kills way more.
Heat is the #1 killer, but you say that is not the case.
Cold actually kills a lot more people. This does not mean that heat is not a problem, but just to give you a sense of proportion, the study from one recently published study across a wide range of nations shows that about 10,000 people die each year from heat in the U.S., but about 171,000 people die from cold.
Bjorn says that our money should be spent on fixing the temperature problems, both cold and hot, now, instead of a century from now.
I'm a little perplexed when people look at poor people who are suffering through a heat wave and say, we should help them by cutting carbon emissions first. And remember, it won't help the poor. Actually, it'll hurt a lot of the poor because they're the ones who spend the biggest fraction of their income on energy that's going to be more costly. What you do need is to dramatically increase investment in research and development into green energy. This does not mean we shouldn't also think about fixing climate change in the long run, but we should be recognizing that if we want to help people now in the next couple of decades from heat, this is not about global warming policy, this is about adaptation.
Adaptation is what Bjorn thinks will have to happen, and it already is in Richmond.
We just recently put in our own small little pocket park and a public-private partnership. And so we're working on figuring out how to scale that up into more neighborhoods around the city, including kind of like a recipe for success in engaging with the private landowner and then implementing a park design that's low cost but really high impact.
I really liked how Jeremy put it. Instead of a silver bullet, this is going to be more like a silver buckshot. We have to fix this problem in a lot of ways. We have to find racial justice, even when it comes to heat. I'm Ginger Zee, and I promise it's not too late.
And a big thanks to our Ginger Zee.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.